We've all heard it said, if it doesn't hold water, it won't hold a goat. Today on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to talk to Daniel Magalsky about how he's running goats and the importance of stockmanship.
Stockmanship has been huge. When you mess up, you get lots of orphans to terrorize your life with. The first 15 days of this kid's life is very fragile as far as the bond. After that, it's rock solid. I mean, for years down the road, these does will be hanging out with 3 generations.
How goats help him drought-proof his ranch.
We can drought proof this place. We don't have leafy spurge on the place, but it's not far away. And leafy spurge never knows when it's a drought because it's a deep tap-rooted plant. And these goats thrive on it.
We're also going to compare profitability between his goat enterprise and, even with our current market conditions, a cow-calf enterprise.
An animal unit, I'm doing $2,800, a little bit better. And so even in this market that we're in, I'm still trotting out in front a little bit.
We'll also talk about the tool that Daniel says if he didn't have this tool, he wouldn't run goats. All that and more on this episode 423 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by the Patreon supporters.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined today by Daniel Magalsky. Daniel is a guy in eastern Montana that has been successfully incorporating goats on his operation, and he's got a lot to say about the importance of stockmanship and some of the other things that we talked about there in the cold open. So very excited to share this conversation with you. But before I do that, I wanted to let you know I'll be speaking on the Profitable Regeneration Summit, along with a host of other characters you've heard on the podcast before. Jared Sorensen, of course, is the man behind the Profitable Regeneration Summit, but also Steve Campbell, Burke Teichert, Wally Olson, many others, other guests that I've tried to get on the podcast before but been unable to. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check it out. In the show notes page for today, there will be a link to register for the Profitable Regeneration Summit coming up April 15th and 16th. And there will be a link there in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/423. Now, here's my conversation with Daniel Magalsky. Daniel, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Glad to be here, Clay. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to talk to you today kind of about the profitable incorporation of small ruminants. So let's set the context of where you're at in the world and kind of your journey as it pertains to small ruminants.
Yeah, you bet, Clay. And just a quick thank you to you and doing your podcast as well. It's been a blessing to my wife, Jen, and our lives as we've gone on our regenerative journey, you might say, and shaping our mindsets into what we're doing. But we're here in eastern Montana, outside of Circle, Montana, pretty well straight middle of top to bottom, and 60 miles from the North Dakota border. Semi-arid environment. Grandpa and his brother came out here, I think, just after the homesteaders from back east, worked for a homesteader and then bought them out. And then Dad started in the late 70s and early 80s. We were gone into missions organization sometime in there as I was a kid. And so the place is a rather smaller land base for the western states here. All dry land. We're about 50 miles from the Yellowstone River and up on top of a divide between the Yellowstone River drainage and the Missouri River drainage. And so everything flows downhill from us. We're at the top. So
Well, and I think that these places in the world really kind of west of the Missouri River until probably the Rocky Mountains. If you get west of the Rockies, I think it's different, but basically from the Missouri River west to the Rockies are places that tend to thrive with small ruminants just based on what they are in their kind of natural context. Would you agree with that?
from what I've seen, it sure has been. So we moved home about 4 years ago, spring of 2021, from Saskatchewan. My wife her family farms up in Saskatchewan there, and we custom fenced and lived up there for our first 10, 11 years of married life and had 3 kids up there and had a small goat herd up there just because we'd actually started it into them because my wife is intolerant to cow's milk. So we got a meat goat from a neighbor who had too much milk and too big a bag, and we started milking her. And next thing we knew, about 6 years later, we had about 50, 60 head, and we were selling a lot more different ethnic groups have moved into Saskatchewan up there. And so we had Pakistani guys driving 3 hours to come butcher wethers and in the yard there. And through our missions experience and stuff like that, cross-cultural experiences, I'd spent time in Pakistan. And so it was a neat connection, being able to get back in the culture and spending time with these guys. So it was a little side hobby that paid. I've kind of figured, but also just seeing how you could adapt a goat to northern climates. Neighbors up in Saskatchewan ran sheep, good wool ewes, and thrived. They did well. And back down here in Montana, big sheep country back in the day. Still quite a few operators with sheep. The goats were a little bit of a different thing, as coming more from a desert area, but not a winter desert area. And so we've kind of gone through the years of just observing and seeing how they adapt and how they grow, learning nutrition and things like that. But the thing I think where the goats have really shined in comparison to sheep has been a lower maintenance in the fact of a lot of parasite issues external. I know there's a little struggle there with wool animals and whatnot, and then flies. I mean, the last few years, all the neighbors' cows have been balled up in corners fighting flies all summer long, and the goats lay on top of the hill and chew their cud. Never gets hot enough. Yeah, they've been good. And so, yeah, that's where I've seen. We are not in pine country. That's a little bit further west of us, but in the pine country area, wow, I really see a big opportunity there because pine needles don't affect them negatively. We'll get into more of this later, I suppose, but leafy spurge grazing has been absolutely phenomenal opportunity for us in our drought management using these small ruminants as our main animals on this property.
Do you kind of have to maintain a certain level of browse availability for the goats, or will they do okay just on basically a straight grass diet?
Instinctively, they would prefer the browse. And so I remember one time when we just had that small group up in Saskatchewan, and I was trying to graze someone's summer fallow field, and there was some crested along the sides, and it was August, so you can about imagine how good that crested was. But there was a little bit out in that field, some weeds to pick up, and they were busting through my electric to go out and graze sagebrush on the neighbor's native. There was durum and chickpeas on the other side, and they didn't care about that, but they were going out to eat sage. And so instinctively, they prefer browse. Moving home here, we've set up a management style of controlled grazing, and narrowed that down to daily moves. in more or less the growing season and some of the dormant season. And so the goal with that has been to manage their nutrient requirements by um, just managing what they're on so that they are still finding their nutrients in the grass species. If I turn them loose, they would go right to the browse. But when I collect them up, I can get a little more even utilization on the grass, and not totally kill out all of our brush that come in really handy in the winter when the wind blows.
Yeah. Well, and that is kind of one of the things that people say about goats is eventually if you're targeting them at a woody species, eventually they work themselves out of a job, right?
Correct. Yeah, 100%. Some days I wonder, it's like, are we a round peg in a square hole kind of thing? Being in eastern Montana, I'm not in a heavy browse area. We have brush. And at first, when we first started into this, it's like, well, it's a way to utilize our brush. Brush is kind of a pansy in this environment. I have friends that go back to Illinois and help clean up their parents' property, and they fight brush all day long and they chainsaw. And it's like, oh my gosh, if you only had goats, they would rock and roll in that stuff up 6-8 feet high. They don't care. They'll back legs, climb up branches, whatever they got to do.
Stand on each other.
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
Do you you mentioned kind of somehow fitting goats into the environment, and you were just saying square peg in a round hole, but you talked about it earlier as well. So have you been selecting for goats that will thrive on this regime of management over time?
Yeah, that's exactly what we've been doing because we want to keep it profitable. And in our environment, it's dry land, and so some years feed is readily available on your own place or neighbor's place, as far as dry forage goes. So if you wanted to, you could just, confinement and dry forage feed them all the time. But it's also years that that's not. And so being able to change and have them adapted to what is growing here and utilize what is growing here at different times of the year is the key. So like we look for things like body condition. If she breeds, we're just doing a yearly breed up, turn bucks out right at Christmas. That gives us about third week of May kidding, on pasture. We find that works really well because there's enough forage growing at that point that the does can be content. So I'm not doing daily moves then. We'll move a front fence in front of them, but definitely no back fence. They just kind of come at their leisure. And so selecting for that, selecting for just animals that look in good shape. We've started down the road of saving our own sires a little bit, and that's coming. It seems like it seems like the things that flourish, it's very easy to tell. It's not a fine line. Let's put it that way. If they're adapted, they're flourishing. If they're not, they're getting consumed by a canine. So it's a lot those lines. We've brought in a lot of hair, a lot of selected bucks of our own, brought in some others that grow a lot of cashmere hair, which on a Spanish goat, mostly Spanish goat, but other breeds will have it too. It'll be a fine hair, real soft, and they'll shed it in the summer. And then we've also brought, just in the last couple of years, an Angora cross buck to put a little mohair on as well. Just to be able to, because goats won't put back fat on like a sheep or a cow. They'll put internal fat on first and then go external. And so I've got to grow a hair coat for these girls to be able to make it through 40 below.
Which you just had last week.
Which we just had for the last week. Yes. It is
it wasn't
not
just
that
one
today.
day last week. It was like every day last week. Didn't get above 10 below zero at all.
Yeah. It was kind of brutal. We're very thankful the wind wasn't blowing real hard. 2020, January 24, we had 40 below with 30, 40, 50 miles. Like it was 65 wind chill. And finding the right place to hunker down in that, with some brush that was just out of the wind just enough and just kind of survive. That is one of the hardest spots for these goats is that real cold like that. Yeah, the weaknesses really show up.
Yeah. So do you see another enterprise of mohair cinches in your future, or are we not going to harvest this and turn it into something?
I'm a firm believer in stacking enterprises,
Yeah.
and so if it is, and definitely stacking enterprises for the next generation. Instead of junior doing more of what dad's doing, start another enterprise, do it on the same acres, and follow what your passion is. And so, heck, if somebody's all down that road, go hard. We will
Yep.
produce mohair. So
Yeah. Mohair cinches and McCarty Rains. You could do it.
there you go. It'd be a beautiful thing.
So you've mentioned a couple of times the grazing side of this equation as well. And I think in the past we've talked about it, and maybe we've kind of alluded to it so far, but you're taking a total grazing approach. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when we moved home, I've got a brother-in-law back up in Saskatchewan who's been down the regenerative journey for more years than I have, and he's very observant, very adaptive, farming and ranching, and so he's been able to be a big counselor and sounding board for me. And he's the one that put me on to this thing. We had taken a holistic management course, and so started to understand recovery, grace period and recovery periods, which was totally new. Neat story on coming down there. But he led us down the road of understanding in a drier environment, the recovery period needs to be longer. And so even when I'm fencing and doing paddocks and stuff like that, I'm not fencing the goats in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fencing them out. I'm fencing them out of the rest of the ranch so that it can get the longest recovery that it can. And regardless of species, the thing I really appreciate is it's made it very simple. And so grazing more mature plants, there's the optimum graze time on a plant. Well, there's about 10 days out of 365 where that's optimum. And then it's like, well, what do I do with the rest of the days? And so adapting the genetics, but also just having the mindset of fulfilling their nutrient requirements and getting as even utilization as possible is really the key for our management, and definitely in this environment.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Patreon supporters. We're closing in on 200 episodes of Patreon exclusive bonus content. The bonus content related to this episode is episode 181. So if you're interested, go check that out at patreon.com/working cows. Really appreciate all the people at all the levels. Some people just give as little as $1 a month to say thank you. Some people are at other levels where they get access to a private Facebook group, or the bonus content is the $10 per month level. That has traditionally been 4 episodes of bonus content per month, but with this more aggressive cadence of releases, it's been 5 or 6 or more pieces of bonus content a month. And so just trying to deliver a lot of value there, as well as the other tiers where you get exclusive swag from the podcast that you can't get anywhere else. So check it out, patreon.com/working cows. Thanks to all the supporters who have been so faithful for all these years. I really appreciate that. A couple of things that have come to my mind in the course of this conversation that I've been thinking about recently. One of them, what you just talked about, the epiphany that I had regarding grazing recently, last couple of years, was that what you're doing when you're grazing regeneratively is more about where you're not than where you are.
100%. Yep.
It's about what that place you're not is having an opportunity to do while you're not there. Namely, express itself, increase diversity, grow greater, forage diversity and amount, and lay down cover on the soil, and, just call the roll, right? I mean, of all the things that it's doing, compounding and cascading effects like that, And then the other thing that occurred to me recently, or just kind of has always been something that I've been ruminating on, I guess, is that, what most people think we are doing by calving in May or lambing in May or kidding in May, late May especially, is escaping weather. But what we're actually doing is reducing the amount of feed we have to feed to an animal during its highest nutrient requirement periods. Is that kind of what you're thinking as well?
Yeah, that's really good, Clay. And we started a little earlier in May when we first moved home, April actually one year, and then kept moving it back. And so there's a few factors that go into that. And so with kidding this group, there's about 400 does out there. And I think with our land base, our goals are to be between 400 and 500. And to be able to kid those on pasture, we recognized very early that we need them to be content. And so to match her nutrient requirements with what she's standing around, a really good doe we'll have them on an area of 10, 15, maybe 20 acres. A really good doe will kid in that spot, when it's May. So her water is getting met by the green and the dew, her water requirements, and her nutrient requirements is getting met with whatever's right around her. And she'll just be right there for 2 to 3 days. And that bonding will happen. We'll sneak in there, throw an ear tag on them, and then gently come back out. Stockmanship has been huge. When you mess up, you get lots of orphans to terrorize your life with. That's definitely been key. And then what species? We've tried doing some winter annuals, or a winter biennial, like winter rye, and kidding on that, trying to match the forage growth and stuff like that with time of kidding, because that's been the biggest key, is just that doe is content to be there. If she's, if I'm coming out with a pickup and putting feed out, whoosh, she's gone, right? And then if it was, if we calculate about 150% kid crop. And so if it was 100%, if she just had one kid to take care of, no problem. She could run after the pickup, go eat some hay, come back and find a kid. But what we find is if she's got to move to go find feed, a lot of times the stronger kid comes with, the other one doesn't. She gets done eating, her belly's full, she turns around, oh, there's my kid, has a suck, and carries on. And doesn't think about the second kid or the third kid. Last year we had a set of quads, and it's like, well, we watched them, and they went through the whole summer with their mom. And we weaned them, and they're in the background a lot, kind of thing. And it's just, so if it'll work, we just leave everybody as B. But a lot of that has to do with the environment that we create. And so, kidding later. It also works out in our marketing as well, but we can come back to that later, just time of market. But it definitely matters. The first 15 days of this kid's life is very fragile as far as the bond. After that, it's rock solid. I mean, for years down the road, these does will be hanging out with 3 generations of kids or daughters or whatever. But the first 15 days is kind of a rodeo.
Describe to me this rotation. What does it look like in eastern Montana? How are you guys approaching the total grazing, and what, just walk me through kind of maybe the day to day, but then also the year to year and getting those longer appropriate recovery times and some of that.
We've utilized cover crops in this as well for those slump times of August, July, August, when maybe cool season grasses, mainly tames, are starting to kind of go backwards in nutritional qualities. We've got a mixture, coulees and stuff like that, so that my lower stuff, it's going to stay greener a little longer. Natives on the hillside, some of the fields have tame grass in them, and then doing some cover cropping as well. And so in simplicity, a strip graze is phenomenal. So hot wires down both sides. If I've got something that's flat enough and long enough, I can just do a hot wire down both sides and then just move a front wire, an acre, move it forward each day, and then my sides just stay put. That's been phenomenal. We use a portable water tank as well that lasts in the heat with this amount. We're lasting about 3 days, and it'll fill overnight. I would like to do some water lines, but infrastructure will come. And so this is our fifth season being home. And so being able to move that water. So what we'll do is we'll move away from the water, and then when the water tank's empty, fill it up overnight, catch back up to the front of the fence. And that way our water points we can be strategic with, our fences we can be strategic with, depending on grass species, depending on where something's at in its recovery. I strive to have over 12 months of recovery, or just not being on it for over 12 months.
Yeah, and that's not just we're not there for 12 months during the growing season. You're not there for 12 months. Is that
correct?
Right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people think, and this has been my biggest failure in grazing is, well, as long as I'm not on it in the growing season, I'm really not hurting it that much. But I think that there's still things happening that you can't replace by just not being there at all.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of this stuff is I'm learning more. Last year was our first year. Like I think we're like a 12% precip zone, something like that. We're sandy loam. And so in our first year, we moved back in March, and June 10th. I always wondered how these old timers could remember dates so well. Well, now I know, because June 10th, we had a half an hour of golf ball size hail. And it broke windows out of the house. It was evening. Broke windows and just kept going for half an hour. And I've never experienced a hailstorm like that, like pea size, marble size. Yeah. But not golf ball, and not for that long. So it desiccated the place, and then it turned hot, and then the grasshopper showed up, and it was a write-off for that year. So what I mean by that is we're seeing the effects. Like we started at zero kind of thing, and we're seeing the effects now. This will be year 5 and whatnot. And so being able to see kind of how stuff is recovering and whatnot is a work in progress. I mean, we're living right in the midst of this story. It's not like I can look back and say, oh yeah, this is how it all works. Because we're right in the middle of it. Yeah, the goats have kind of been my drought plan as well. We can go down that road too, of taking them out to graze. And that's kind of, I think, played a key into keeping our infrastructure management, our fences and our water portable and temporary. I don't like to ride out and have to cross 16,000 fences. And so putting up a grid of fences everywhere, not really interested. And I don't know how to graze this place correctly yet, right. When it's all moved. So adapting is the name of the game. Much to my wife's frustration. She's a little more organized, and I'm a little bit more like, well, got new information, so we're changing the plan. It's like we just made a plan, and now we're changing it. But being able to be adaptive and portable like that has been a key, because we can do it at home, or we can do it on someone else's place too.
Sure. And that's what you mean about the goats being the drought plan, is you're taking them somewhere else to graze.
Yeah. So in a drought,
or after a disaster like a half an hour hailstorm.
Yeah. When everything's gone, you typically have a big economic change, right? Because now all of a sudden you need to destock, and you've got to put that money aside to be able to stock back up no matter what you're running. Where with the goats, nobody ever invites you to graze on their place with your cows. But you can have people knock your door down to come graze their weeds with the goats. The logistics are challenging. And so there's a lot of people doing a lot of cool work with prescribed grazing on really neat scale, and charging for their services because it's an ecological service that they are doing. They are harvesting an unwanted vegetation and turning that in, changing the species that are growing there, because instinctively the goats are going to focus on the woody, the browse, and the broadleafs. And usually most people want the grasses kind of thing, right? In an environment. And so they've, even coming home and making the business plan for what we're going to do when we come home here, that was an aspect of it of we can drought proof this place because we don't have leafy spurge on the place, but it's not far away. And leafy spurge never knows when it's a drought because it's a deep tap rooted plant, drawing moisture from way down there. And these goats thrive on it. If I didn't have neighbors that would hate me, I would find leafy spurge seed and seed it into a perennial stand because it's it's phenomenal feed. But yeah, I won't do that. So everybody downstream from me can just settle down because I'm not going to. But it's phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You thought they were talking about you at the coffee shop before.
Luckily, we're at the end of the road, so I don't get a whole lot of gawkers. But
Good.
yeah, it's good.
You're not causing any traffic accidents with people looking at what you're doing and rear-ending the car in front of them.
Exactly. The one benefit of being 12 miles off the pavement and the
Yep.
end of the gravel road.
Yep.
If anybody hit here, it's because they're lost. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So yes, appreciate all that. We're very much the same. Our place is very adaptable. We are very adaptable. A lot of the same things. Portable water infrastructure. We have 3 permanent tanks on a half section, and then we break that up with a long run of poly on the ground, and we got upwards of 40 paddocks last year out of that system, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with really adaptable systems is that they require a lot of labor, right?
Yeah, they do.
And so can you share with me some of your tips, tricks, hacks, equipment that you have found useful in saving labor in a very adaptable infrastructure system?
Yeah, you bet, Clay. So moving home, creating our plan to move home, deciding on scaling. Mom and Dad had a few goats, so we decided to scale that up because of the profitability per acre on a goat that we can do some numbers on. I knew that management was going to be a key issue. In Canada, we had tried doing some burdock grazing for neighbors. I mean, just took hours to put fence up and take it down, using multiple strand, single strand. So, you're walking along, rolling it up. And so searching the internet for an answer, and I found something across the pond, a tool for a 4-wheeler. I thought, oh, this could work. No way of getting it. Just not interested. And so when we moved here, we're like, well, we'll just figure it out. We'll set up some permanent paddocks and we'll just rotate however we need to. And we're trying. It was taking us like 3 hours. One person, limited amount of resources too. So the wife's riding herd with the border collie, holding everybody at bay. Dad and I are rolling up fence, and it's just taking hours to do just 2 strands and move these paddocks around. It's like, this isn't working. So off to the junkyard we go. And we put together kind of our own version of what I had seen. And so it was a electric fencing machine that would drive off the tire of a 4-wheeler and would roll up 2 spools of poly wire, and the spool's half a mile long. And so, it was running off the back. And so picking up fence was beautiful because you drive along and you weren't dragging the fence through the grass. Being adaptable, you're curving, you're going around coulees, brush, just different stuff like that. It wasn't straight runs. It's not flat here. And so being able to drive along and pick it up as we went was just absolutely amazing. We still struggled a little bit because I still had to have somebody putting the posts in as I rolled it out. And so going back to our first year with our hailstorm, and like, we got to do something. There's nothing left here. We're going to beat this place up if we try to summer here. So we went out to about 15 miles away to leafy spurge graze, and I just rode on them with a horse and a border collie, which was a lot of fun. Every day just kind of moseying around. Took me back to missions trips in Eastern Africa, and you know, poking along through the hills. It was a blast. Those goats, I could start them at the top of a coulee, and they'd filter down through the brush in that coulee, and every leafy spurge plant got affected. By the time I caught them at the bottom, I didn't have to ride through the coulee. I had hundreds of little radars. And so that's kind of what started us down this journey of building this little unit, this electric fence machine, and then figuring out, okay, if we stack our posts on the front, okay, now if we have another shaft on the front that we can string the wires out past us, we can actually one pass put a fence up, turn around, one pass take it down, and everything's contained. And it's if I'm moving, the fence is rolling. If I stop, the fence stops. I'd done a lot with a drill, pulling it through the grass, and that was great if it was short. That was great if there was nothing to catch the wire. And I found if I could just pick up the fence, phenomenal. So we ordered a bunch of PowerFlex, single strand, the 9-strand stuff. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. So if Jim Garish and all them boys at PowerFlex say this is the best wire to use, boy howdy, that's what we're using. And so we've developed this thing around it, and then to the point of we're bringing it to market actually, because I think it's something that can answer the labor call of our friends and our neighbors that are handling electric fence daily. Single or multiple, 2 strands is what we're at right now. I'd love to go more strands, but for right now, we can handle 2 half-mile spools, and I can carry about 100. We use strain rate posts. They're like a O'Brien, and so that way we can do different heights. And so we've been able to actually, in honesty, we don't manage them just with fence, because anybody that's ever seen a goat, 2-strand electric, it ain't going to hold water. But using this tool and then understanding their contentedness, their behavior, and working between those two things, we've been successful. Perfection is not there, but definitely successful and able to manage this. So we manage on our own grass, our own cover crops, neighbor stubble fields, leafy spurge grazing out and about, and I can leave, kind of thing. It's not perfect. I know a lot of people using netting fence, but that doesn't work when I'm working with, I figure our group is about 48 standard animal units. That 400 or so, they're weighing about 120 pounds. And so I need some biomass to be able to, set that up for a day or multiple days or whatever. And so those two things working together, that tool, a hot fence, training, this summer we had some trouble. And so we brought them back into the corral, ran a hot wire around them. And it was the kids that they needed a good shock. And so we did that for a few hours, back out we went, we were good to go, kind of thing. So training, the right tools to cut down on labor, and then observing their behavior can be successful in managing them on now it takes me 15-20 minutes to go move goats. As opposed to hours. Let's put it this way, if I didn't have the tool, I wouldn't run goats. So yep.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so tell me about, what is the product, what do you call it, where does somebody go to get it?
Okay, so yeah, you bet. We're calling it the tire winder, since it rolls up using your tire on your 4-wheeler. We'll develop one for side-by-side as well, coming down the road here. We got a Facebook page called Tire Winder, email address and phone. So this is not my forte. I am learning so much in manufacturing and things like that. But we plan to launch middle of March of 2025 here, and we'll see kind of what our response is in the marketplace, and then go from there. And just, yeah, so that'll be contact ways of being able to get a hold of us and find out more on this product. And I hope to be able to have down the road just the complete inventory, so somebody can put together, stand on our shoulders basically, and the post we like, the wire we like, the spools, all that, and be able to just hook it up to the rack on your four-wheeler and then go build fence.
Sure. Yeah, very good. Yeah, all that will be linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net is the show notes page for today, and we'll have links to the Tire Winder website or at least Facebook page and how to get a hold of Daniel and all that, and hopefully be able to get your hands on one real soon. I'm hoping to be one of, if not the first customer. So
perfect.
It sounds like something that we need. Our kind of 2025 plan is to not take in custom grazers and to scale our sheep up, the sheep operation up. And so this will be, I think, a crucial piece of us doing that successfully. So very, very cool piece of equipment. And there'll be videos linked also in the show notes page for today. And so you'll kind of be able to see it in action and see how it works. So very good stuff. Yeah, and there's a lot more here, obviously, that we've talked about, that you've mentioned, and so I'd like to continue on talking about some of that. One of the things that you mentioned that I think, I don't know about goats, honestly, but I know sheep are definitely different than cows from a stockmanship perspective, so I'd like to spend a little time camped out there talking about stockmanship as it relates to goats and some of the things that you've learned.
Yeah, you bet. Being a young family, I'm up for 30s, and so we got three young kids at home, 7, 9, and 11. And so being able to handle livestock with them in the corral, even at younger ages, right when we first moved back, and being able to teach them how to handle livestock has been phenomenal. We handle our goats like we would a cow, in the sense, just like we would cattle. We use a bud box system. The whole concept, as far as working them down a chute or whatever, coming back from where they came. I'll, with the border collies, I'll push or I'll drive. Either or. We've herded them. I think we did 12 miles one day. They're coming back from leafy spurge grazing off of horses, and they handled really well. A lot of people say that goats will mainly my wool sheep friends, that they don't group together. They will spread out, independent minded, kind of like a blackface or a hair sheep, that kind of stuff. And I find it's a lot about the management throughout the rest of the year. So being that we have, a goat naturally would like to put 6 to 8 miles on a day. It doesn't mean a straight line, but they're always, so that browse mentality, they're eating and moving. Not like a cow or a ewe where she just stops and eats. So creating a competition grazing pattern is very easy. Mm-hmm. They're very willing to be competing against their buddy for the first bite, the best bite, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. I do want to just stop you for a second there, because that was another thing that was on my mind with regard to total grazing. Is that's what total grazing does, right? Is it basically now we're in a food eating competition, and we've got like Joey Chestnut over here trying to eat more hot dogs than the guy next to him, and that's kind of the mindset that these, I think, all animals that I'm aware of in a total grazing regime of management, that's kind of the mindset that they get into. And I think that is a stockmanship issue, because it plays a large part in my opinion. The main reason a small ruminant gets out is because, not necessarily because they're hungry, but because they're bored.
Yeah.
And so this regime of management keeps them from getting bored, I think, is part of why it works, that they stay in 2 wires. Agreed,
Clay. And then also sheep and goats struggle from internal parasite resistance, right? They will, I mean, that's besides 40 below, I would say internal parasites is the number one. I mean, we don't have a big predator issue. We run guard dogs I see a little bit at kidding season. Other than that, I don't know. I don't see much, but they're balled up most of the year, in our tighter group. But the internal parasites, and I think, we don't put a back fence up almost never, because they don't want to go back there. They fouled that. They can smell it. They have no desire. I mean, even when they're walking back to water 3 days across what they just grazed, they're not putting their heads down nibbling. Very seldom. They want to get back out there to the fresh stuff. They can tell you what's good if I'll observe. The mule deer and the whitetail are handy for that too, because they'll jump a fence and tell me where my good quality forage is at. So I can just observe them as well. But that's something huge as well, is that, in more of a set stock kind of a pattern, I have to have a prison fence because they've fouled everywhere and they don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And so I have to run chain link and razor wire.
Yeah, that was Roland Cruz was the first one that turned me onto that, and he's one of those guys that you're talking about. Or I mean, maybe you weren't specifically referring to him, but he's one of those guys who does targeted grazing with goats and has found it to be pretty profitable. But he said what caused the bison herds to move on from a place, and like me and 5 other people, shouted out predators, and he's like, no, predators are what kept them tight. Yep. Fouling is what moved them on.
Yep.
And here's the advantage of the West, right? I did a great piece of bonus content with John Haskell on the advantages of ranching in the West. And he said our ability to store forage quality is our main advantage. But here's another one. It doesn't rain here. So the fouling effect doesn't get washed away. And they're not tempted to return to that because it's still fouled from 3 days ago or whatever.
Yep.
And so when it rains, then maybe the fouling effect is a little bit diminished, but that's few and far between after June or after July 1st in our place, our neighborhood, and so then it's another one of those advantages that helps this work.
Yeah, completely agree with that, and that also ties into the fencing. Yeah, for sure, is that fouling, not wanting to go back where they were, and so then. And then, and it must be the way God's made them, is that they want to compete. They're fast eaters. When we're the winter time here, we're putting a little bit like our backgrounders and stuff like that through the cold. We're putting some corn out, some screenings and stuff like that. And, just buckets right now, but it's like, you got to get some feed out there in a hurry. Otherwise they got it cleaned up and they're ready, the ones that started eating are now competing for the slower, like that. And so they're fast eaters. When they go through, brush or whatever, like they're nailing the leaves, they're nailing the little ends of the twigs quickly. And so creating that competitive, I mean, I'm not even really creating it. I'm just nurturing it. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's been able to bring them onto grass species and get them. And then also understanding that, hey, if that stuff's a little bit mature and lower protein, I'm going to supplement a little protein out there. I mean, one cheap way, we're neighbors are farm country, chickpea, dry pea, yellow pea screenings. Awesome. Cheap, easy, very cheap way to supplement protein out on pasture or something like that, to get their biology in their guts being able to digest this lower quality forage. We're still working down that road, learning more about that. We did a little bit of dormant season sorghum sedan grazing in December. Phenomenal. I loved it, and the reason I can tell that I liked it is because they were content. And so again, still moving a fence, more every few days, but then supplementing that protein. And so, it's amazing how I can change what they would normally, I'll put it this way, underneath my control and my management is what they're willing to eat if I understand why they would eat it and why they would not. And I can tweak that a little bit. Back to what we said earlier too, just about goats getting out or, spreading out, more individual thinking and stuff like that. And it's underneath our management. The more these goats spend time together in a mob, in a group, the more they just stick together like that. I know of a producer up in Saskatchewan. He's done a pile of prescribed grazing. and a lot of herding while he does his prescribed grazing. And then he comes home in the fall and he looks out to his pasture, and his goats, group of a few hundred goats, are in a straight line, grazing across a paddock or a field in a straight line, just the same way he sets them up with his horse and his border collie to come into a leafy spurge patch in a straight line, shoulder to shoulder. They're doing the same thing. I know, well, my brother-in-law there, he said, when I first wanted to tighten up my cows, he said they were going backwards. Like I was thinking, oh, we'll do daily moves, we'll do high density and stuff like that. He's like, oh my gosh, like it was not good. They were not content. They were not doing well nutritionally. 6 years later, so over time, he opened them back up. He's tightened them up over time. Now, when he opens them up on a quarter section, they graze together. It might be during harvest season, he kicks them out together. And now those cows have learned to graze as a group. And so I almost think it's not a species thing. I mean, maybe there's a little bit there of instinct, but boy, it's a management thing on how, will they stay balled up? Will they spread out? That kind of stuff. Typically, if we do have something moving through a fence, I don't have one goat go through the fence. It's all of them. And so if I'm looking for the goats, they're all in one group. I heard one person, they had lost the goats for a few days. Another friend, they had wandered miles away. And he said, we just started looking, Saskatchewan's lots of rocks in the farm ground. And so everybody's got rock piles. And so his group of 50 goats, he said, I looked for a rock pile that was moving. And then I knew we had our goats. So you always just look for that moving rock pile because it kind of looks that way. But no, balling them up like that really just rewires their thinking to make them want to graze in a group, which, helps with predators, which helps. It just, the list of benefits goes just all the way down.
And I think how much of what we do in challenging paradigms is management related, right? Like everybody says, well, that won't work here. That can't be done here. There's a limitation. It's the species. That's just who they are. That's the way they're wired. Yeah, maybe it is, or maybe our management can influence the way they're wired. And there's a range of different behaviors that can be expressed if our management's wired in or dialed in to them as a critter.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The expression of behavior, the expression of genetics, underneath different management, underneath different environments. Take the same species or the same breed or the same, family tree and put them in two different environments underneath two different managers, and you got two different animals.
Yeah.
Very different.
Let's talk about marketing a little bit. You mentioned the fact that kidding in May helps with the marketing. In our case, and I don't want to steal your thunder here, but in our case, lambing in May sets you up to market the lamb at the weight they want it during kind of that ethnic run when the ethnic markets are really humming with, different ethnic holidays that are looking for lamb. Mm-hmm. Is that part of what's going on there, or is there something else that's playing with your kidding season lining up with your marketing season?
Yeah, the kidding season kind of just falls where it's the best, and it just as a side benefit, it benefits our marketing as well. And what we've realized, so we've like I said, when we had we had our hobby group. And I found that these guys from other countries, a lot of them first generation immigrants, hardworking family people. And so, especially when we're doing just the direct to consumer, they're coming out butchering, we're helping them. It was a lot of fun. It was a taste of home. That's why they liked it. I was talking to a neighbor, a rancher there. I was like, is it ethical that I'm charging this much? Like, they're eating this stuff for $9 a pound on their plate. I was like, is that even nice? Like, and he said, Daniel, you got to realize that different cultures, they consume and they look at food differently. And so what we're providing is a taste of home for these folks. I mean, there might be, the health down that road. Goat meat is pretty darn good that way as far as a red meat. But for the most part, our market um, is immigrants from all over the world. I mean, it's not just Muslim. And so it's not just Middle Eastern. It's not Southeast Asia. I mean, China is actually the largest consumer of goat meat worldwide. I mean, the Caribbean, South America, Africa, and everybody wants a goat at a different weight, almost a different style of carcass and things like that. And so we've just kind of done the low hanging fruit, and that is a 60-pound goat. It just fits nicely into the everyday ethnic group consumer. Mm-hmm. And what that does, what I've learned, is that feeds a family for a week. Basically, a 60-pound live weight carcass feeds a family of 5-6 people for a week. And so it's a fresh, the concept is a fresh carcass. They're utilizing everything. We had a Christian Nigerian family come to the place and butcher up in Canada, and they took everything. That was a new experience. And I was like, how do you cook that up? Soup. How do you cook that up? Soup. I was like, I'm catching this is all soup.
There's a
and
theme
it's just
here.
all in portions. Yeah. So understanding food differently that way. So we've just gone into stockyards. Billings has a good one. Sioux Falls has a good one. They're all a distance from us. We're not halfway. Billings is definitely closer. I appreciate Sioux Falls. They've been very helpful, very good to work with. Just now, new this year. Well, let me back up. Even going into those stockyards, I could see the trend very easily. And it's a very honest market. When there's supply, the demand goes down. When there's low supply, the demand goes up. And so every year I noticed January through March, the demand went up. And it was just, it's just honest. It's just bang. Like, it's just right there. It's just always a few outside influences like Australian imports and little things like that, storm weather, But, it's not a market. It's not a global market in the way that beef is. And so very honest market. Mm-hmm. And so young families starting out with a limited amount of capital, I want to go into an honest market, something I can almost bank on. And so, so we've just found through some friends a broker down in Minnesota. And the nice thing is we just shipped a little load of wethers to him, and then I got feedback from him. And I said, how do they look? How does this fit? All that kind of stuff. And so we've learned a ton about marketing from him, because the rest of the states, kind of, Midwest, Southern goats, they all sell out about December. And January through March is when they start to look up in our neck of the woods for goats. And so that's why we jump. I mean, we sold some the beginning of December for $2.80 a pound, and we sold some here the other day, pert near the same weight, for $4 a pound. So $1.20 difference per pound, just because of time of year. And so it's working out that way, that we can we'll bring them, to November, we'll wean them, and we'll do a backgrounding, and do, not an astronomical amount of gain on them, 10 to 15 pounds of gain. Goats are not real good returners. I'm learning. It takes some feed, and some pretty high energy and some good protein in there too. But it's more of it's almost a cost per day more than a cost of gain, because I'm trying to get them to that 60-pound range, and a lot of people will come off pasture pretty well close to that. But we're able to just, not push them hard through the summer. They can do whatever they want, be good, come in at 45 pounds, put 10, 15 pounds on them, and then go January through March and get a really good return.
Okay, so I think where I'd like to wrap up is let's just talk about the bottom line, and if you feel comfortable about the numbers, comparing cows in your zip code to goats, even in high prices like we're having now for beef and for cows. Let's talk about the profitability comparison between cows and goats. Do you have a sense of that comparison?
A little bit, yeah. I try to, when I'm doing my numbers and I'm thinking about this, I am trying to work off of comparing it to if this was a cow enterprise. And so what I see right now with where our genetics are today is, winter feed cost, of course, is your highest cost, just because it takes a lot of feed to keep these guys warm and in good condition. But how do I put this? I can fit my plan pretty easily into a conventional plan. 120 days of feed pretty easily. That's what all my neighbors are doing. Maybe a little more. With my later kidding, I can get out to grass a little sooner with some supplement, because it's not the last 3 months I'm worried about. It's the last 30 days as far as late gestation. But I try to bring everything to that standard animal unit of 1,000 pounds. And so I from what our numbers are at and where our animals are at right now, I go down lots of rabbit trails of, well, this is where I want to be. But anyway, for today, we're about 120 pound doe. And so there's about 8.3 goats to a standard animal unit, 1,000 pounds. If I'm doing quick numbers, I'll just say 10 goats to a cow because she's a 1,200 pound cow, 120 pound goat, nice and easy. But I'll do a standard animal unit. And so, we've seen a really good average of 150% kidding crop. There's some death loss in there. And so there's some management work to be done in that. But I'll just run through these numbers of what we see. So if I've got a 120 pound doe and she's raising a kid and a half on average, and I'm weaning her in 5 months, and I'm just going to say on average, we're going to wean them at 45 pounds. And then, so that doe's raising 67.5 pounds per doe. And then if I convert that up to a standard animal unit, again, 1,000 pounds, not 12 or 1,400 pounds, those 8.3 goats are raising 560 pounds of meat off this place. And then I'm going to background from anywhere between 60 to 120 days. My backgrounding costs, from where I'm at, I think I'm right about 15 cents per kid goat a day. Yeah, I could move that around a little bit. More direct cost, I'll say that. 15 cents of direct cost. There's going to be overheads and fun stuff like that to muddy up the water some. But anyway, and so I'm going to be between $9 and $18 to bring them to my marketing day in that backgrounding. And then I'm going to sell them at 60 pounds at $3.80 or $4, somewhere right around in there. So if I bring all that down, and I've got 8.3 goats per animal unit, and they are raising a goat and a half, a kid and a half, an animal unit, I'm doing $2,800, a little bit better. A little bit better if I go up to just, comparing it to goats versus cows, 1,400 pounds. And so even in this market that we're in, I'm still trotting out in front a little bit. And that's with raising these goats, kind of 120 days of winter feed, pretty well the same grazing, same pastures I'd be using if we were running cows here. I can scale them a lot faster than I can a cow, being a kid and a half. These kid goats, they are, so they're selling for just over $200 a head, 225 or so, at that. So I can still, I could save a third of my kid crop to scale and still sell 100%, save 50%, sell 100%. So as far as a young family or adding that enterprise, it's been phenomenal to be able to scale up. Um, my infrastructure has been, I mean, it's pretty cheap to throw together some goat corrals, um, and handy things like that. There's so many learning things though. Stock tanks, got to kind of navigate so they don't fall in there and drown. Hay feeders, bunk line, oh geez, so many different things. Like I said, parasites, managing that. Even with our rotations the way we are, there's still some parasite load in there that still kicks us in the pants sometimes. Um, but but with these goats, I've been able to stay out in front as far as comparing it to cows, and I can do it as a family. I can do it in chunks. I don't. I can. It's very hard to go do something else and then run goats on the side, but I can run goats and do something else on the side. So if I go help a neighbor calve in March here, we're still just kind of normal winter choring. Our costs to run these goats, that one I'm still working on a little bit. We're going to do a lot more dormant season grazing of warm season annuals. Found that to be phenomenal. It was shelter plus it was nutrients all in the same acre. And they utilized 70-80% of it. We had 100-acre field here that we did winter rye on, and we kidded on it for 30 days. And then in June, had the opportunity because there was some moisture. We let the rye grow back up, and I went through with the disc drill, just a box drill, seeded sorghum sudan in there, and then terminated the rye. And I mean, it's not a ton, but we got 47 animal days out of that standard animal unit. And I grazed it with the rye, I grazed it green with the sorghum, and I grazed it dormant, all in the same acres. It was the best crop I've seen since moving home with our semi-arid, droughty years we've had. And so, yeah, that's been kind of a neat thing. So,
yeah, Daniel, very good. Really appreciate your time today. Anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
Oh, it's a privilege to steward God's creation. Somebody asked me how it's going, moving home and running the place. I said, I've been the most frustrated, the most depressed, and the most aggravated, and the most fulfilled all at the same time. Managing through some downtimes and stuff like that. Oh, a network, I tell you. Being on the same page as a family is huge. I've got harebrained ideas and lots of ideas. Visionary. I'm definitely a visionary one. And my wife and I teaming up, my dad and I, on this tire winder, being able to bounce ideas. My dad has been just a massive amount, and my wife, of just ideas, and other people of just different ideas. So that community, managing our relationships, has been huge. We went to a Steve Kenyon workshop at our Eastern Montana Regenerative Agriculture group when we first moved down. And he was talking about seeing things as different accounts, ecologically, economically, your finances, your relationships. And sometimes you manage and you make deposits into different accounts. And sometimes you make withdrawals, but you make sure that there's a balance in there that you can make a withdrawal. Mm-hmm. That's been absolutely massive in our lives to make sure that we don't sink underneath the pressures of ranching in these days. So building relationships, and just as the manager and as the leader, making sure that these different accounts are healthy, that they're in the black, and that they're flowing, has been huge. So I appreciate it. It's a fun journey. It's fun to bring the kids on with too. And I don't know, whatever God has for them, if they want to take some part of this business over, or someone else, down the road. I'm trying to start with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. So how do I want to hand off the baton? And so we stack enterprises. I'm not in manufacturing in these kinds of things, but I'm learning. So that way, if that gets handed off to somebody else, that's awesome. So yeah, that's been really good, Clay. Community and relationships.
Yeah, very good. Daniel, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Clay.
Very good stuff there with Daniel. Really appreciate his perspective and how he has been putting these things into practice, and very much looking forward to maybe getting my hands on one of those tools coming up real soon. So check that out in the show notes page as well. As I said in the outro to the Monday episode this week, looking forward to sharing this conversation with Frank Hendricks. Frank has developed and found a genetic marker that is 100% accurate in predicting the tenderness of beef. And so we're going to talk to him about how he found it and how you can use his test to find it in your beef as well. That is coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.